The so-called apology tour arrives dressed as contrition and performs with commendable commitment the exact opposite. A public demonstration of why 3 former partners grew stronger without the man now asking for applause. The exercise does not illuminate repentance. It documents a long-running administrative failure finally being rebranded as spiritual leadership, as if the audience might mistake a microphone for character. For years, the original wives functioned as single mothers with a part-time figurehead. Raising children without reliable daily partnership tends to produce 2 outcomes: competence and a severely diminished appetite for paternal theatrics. Careers were built, businesses were launched, homes were purchased, because there was no realistic expectation that one man attempting to maintain multiple marriages and a sprawling set of children could be emotionally present and operationally useful. The myth of the omnipresent patriarch collapses under basic arithmetic. Yet the patriarchal self-image persists, buoyed by delusion. The belief that showing up occasionally and announcing grand intentions qualifies as fatherhood, husbandry, or leadership. The marriages, in other words, created the women now sitting across from the apologies. Hardworking, tenacious, and no longer susceptible to being impressed by performance. Early on, respect may have existed. Time and neglect tend to convert respect into tolerance, and tolerance into dismissal. Emotional support came from one another, from friends, from family, anywhere but the supposed center of the structure. Eventually, the husband became less a partner and more a recurring complication, a shared issue to manage, rarely the most urgent one. Only when the intensity of day-to-day child-rearing eased could the wives afford to address what had been obvious for years: that the marriages were not functioning and that the man in the middle had confused symbolic authority for actual contribution. This is why the apology tour lands with the force of a damp napkin. It assumes the former wives are still invested in earning his approval, still competing for his attention, still awaiting his spiritual clearance to proceed with their lives. Instead, the dominant mood is fatigue, irritation, and, most damningly, indifference. The apologies do not reopen old wounds so much as remind everyone why the wounds stopped receiving care in the first place. One former wife displays something close to contempt, not the lively anger of someone still attached, but the cold recoil of someone recognizing a familiar con. The man appears to interpret this not as a sign of finality, but as an invitation to try harder, as if humility itself were an irresistible seduction tactic. The central misunderstanding is almost elegant in its arrogance. Hostility is not the opposite of love. Indifference is. The apology tour plays like a man attempting to restart a relationship by insisting he is still the relationship's axis. The former wives are not hostile. They are done. The difference matters, but the man cannot process it. He expected his patriarchal status to grant permanent centrality, an enduring entitlement to be pursued, to be soothed, to be treated as consequential. When that entitlement expires, the ego does not quietly retire. It searches for a sponsor. Enter the wife who still performs reverence. One reading of the dynamic argues that the favored wife treats him as intelligent, capable, and authoritative because she lacks the competence and independence displayed by the original wives. In that framing, the contrast is the attraction. A woman without a career, without business ambition, and without a visible drive towards self-sufficiency can elevate a mediocre man into a household genius simply by deferring to him. A steady diet of deference is intoxicating to anyone committed to the fantasy of being a great man. Crocodile tears, solemn agreement, and the ritual of "you know best" offer him the mirror he prefers, the image of a decisive patriarch, rather than an overstretched, resentful, and frequently absent partner. In that mirror, he becomes the man he imagines himself to be. The relationship then runs on a predictable fuel source: validation of his worldview, reinforcement of his final authority, and the comfort of never being outshone. In that story, devotion is not earned. It is engineered by selecting a partner who will never compete on competence, strength, or success. But there is an equally plausible and frankly more unsettling interpretation. The favored wife is not an innocent dependent worshiping a smarter man. She is the sharper operator. The ego stroking is not evidence of her simplicity. It is evidence of strategy. A narcissistic personality does not love intelligence, morality, or partnership. It loves supply, admiration, loyalty performances, and narrative control. The favored wife appears adept at providing that supply, while simultaneously keeping consequences at bay. Her skill is not in confronting the narcissist. It is in manipulating the manipulator, maintaining the illusion that he is the hero while quietly steering outcomes to her advantage. A telling example emerges in the private coaching that precedes a difficult conversation. Genuine support would sound like encouragement toward accountability. Acknowledge discomfort, affirm courage, insist on ownership. Instead, the guidance is softer and more self-protective. Reminders that blame is shared, reassurance that patience is required, subtle permission to avoid any real reckoning. He receives exactly what he wants: moral cover, without being forced into the unpleasant work of change. She receives what she wants: continued control of the household narrative, while presenting herself as gentle, misunderstood, and fragile. The arrangement is symbiotic. He gets to cosplay decency. She gets to cosplay innocence. This duality, dependence versus cunning, does not need to be resolved to be true in effect. A person can be emotionally limited in one arena and ruthlessly proficient in another. The favored wife can be dull in ordinary life, yet skilled in the specialized occupation of keeping a narcissist invested. Remove the stage, remove the family politics, remove the constant competition for resources and attention, and the personality may read as flat. Little business acumen, little curiosity, little internal problem-solving. When confronted with difficulty, the eyes scan outward for rescuers, rather than inward for responsibility. And yet, within the narrow field of manipulation, she can be remarkably competent. Playing helpless, playing virtuous, playing loyal, all while positioning herself as the axis of the man's decisions. She does not have to outthink everyone in every domain. She only has to outmaneuver them in the one domain that matters here: access to the patriarch and the family's money and time. The favored wife's conduct has also telegraphed an instinct for preemptive narrative control. When asked for examples that might cast another wife in a negative light, the preferred posture is righteousness, refusal to participate, claims of principle, a performance of ethical restraint. Yet the refusal itself can function as implication. Declining to provide an example while announcing that it would be against code suggests knowledge of precisely the kind of incident being requested. It plants suspicion without supplying evidence, achieving maximum damage with minimal accountability. It is a neat trick. The sanctimony of silence paired with the insinuation of insider information. Meanwhile, the patriarch remains astonishingly needy for praise. The apology episodes reveal a man seemingly convinced that viewers will reward him for magnanimity, as if the act of appearing on camera to speak about himself counts as service to others. Comments about peace after the apologies underscore the primary beneficiary of the exercise, his own nervous system. The former wives are framed as recipients of liberation, but the emotional payoff is his. The relief of having performed remorse without submitting to consequences. The underlying wish is almost childlike. Say the scripted words, receive the treat. Unfortunately for him, the audience can see the mask slip, and the former wives are no longer cast members in his private religion. The broader public context makes the impending ego collision even more predictable. When image rehabilitation efforts fail, whether through reality stunts, competitive showcases, or carefully staged remorse, narcissism does not adapt with humility. It escalates, then collapses. The favored wife, having built her household around managing his self-image, is now strapped into a ride that depends on constant illusion. When the illusion breaks, the descent is not gentle. Money, however, is the quiet antagonist that explains much of the family's decay. Consider the grotesque symbolism of discretionary spending placed beside medical necessity. On one side sits an extensive collectible hobby with documented purchasing patterns and expensive accessories. On the other, a child's surgery with a price tag that should have clarified priorities for any functional parent. The contrast is not merely distasteful, it is diagnostic. Spending tens of thousands on dolls and wardrobe pieces while children's medical needs become negotiable is not a budgeting quirk. It is a moral ledger. It suggests a household where the favored wife's comforts and image projects are treated as urgent, while other children's pain is treated as inconvenient. The pattern expands beyond one surgery. The discussion points toward a culture of medical neglect, insurance avoided, healthcare deferred, crises minimized. This is not presented as an isolated misjudgment, but as a systemic practice commonly observed in adjacent religious subcultures. Cost avoidance disguised as faith, control disguised as prudence. The result is predictable. Children learn where they rank. The family learns what truly matters. And the patriarch, never content with quiet shame, continues to demand admiration for decisions that should require apology. The show's existence is the paradox that both trapped and liberated the family. Polygamy, as a structure, is repeatedly characterized as unworkable, corrosive to women, damaging to children, and especially punishing to older wives once novelty and fertility become the household's currency. The fantasy of one big happy family may have been doomed before the newest wife arrived, because the personalities were mismatched and the structure incentivized competition rather than mutual care. Yet the arrival of the younger, shy, pretty wife is treated as the accelerant that turned dysfunction into visible collapse. What held the system together earlier was not happiness, it was inertia, obligation, and the practical demands of young children. Once the children grew and the wives gained resources, the spell broke. Resources matter. Leaving polygamy often requires money and property. Without them, exit is theoretical. The show supplied income, public visibility, and options. It may also have supplied the incentive to maintain a farce long after relationships died. Loyalty speeches and "stay for the family" rhetoric read differently when understood as "stay for the contract." The impending end of the show, then, is not merely a narrative closure. It is a financial reckoning. Freedom is celebrated, but the loss of income will sting, and it will test how much of the post-marital harmony is genuine and how much is simply professional cooperation. While structural critique hums in the background, the patriarch keeps offering smaller, more embarrassing evidence of his character. There is the performative sprinting whenever cameras appear, as though motion itself signals masculinity. Full suit and dress shoes, then suddenly a dash. An overcrowded garage, then suddenly a dash. There is the insistence on philosophical profundity, delivered by a man who often seems unable to understand the basic humanity of the women across from him. There is the compulsive talking over of others, the need to dictate what can and cannot be said, the reflex to treat conversation as a monologue with supporting cast. The apology scenes show this plainly. The interruption, the correction, the attempted framing of boundaries as hostility. It is not remorse. It is control, wearing a softer outfit. His accountability avoidance is a study in rhetorical gymnastics. Apologies are padded with excuses. Grievances are reframed as mutual failures. Neglect is blamed on others' choices. Children's estrangement is pinned on their mothers, and personal desire is presented as tragedy. Even the language of fairness becomes a threat. The suggestion that a wife should be grateful for receiving what was always hers, as though the patriarch deserves credit for refraining from theft. When a former wife cannot respond fully, whether due to legal constraints, production limitations, or strategic restraint, he treats silence as victory, securing the on-air narrative he came to harvest. The discomfort escalates when the patriarch's interactions with certain younger women are scrutinized. His worldview reduces women to relational property, someone's wife, someone's future wife, rather than autonomous individuals. Religious rituals become opportunities for domination, whispering prayers that impose his spiritual identity onto moments that should belong to someone else's choice. The result is not protectiveness, it is ownership. And the audience response is a predictable shiver of revulsion. Even his lighter moments betray the same pathology. The dancing, performed with the confidence of a man who has never watched himself honestly, becomes another example of self-perception divorced from reality. The hair flipping, the affected walk, the laugh, small, persistent reminders that performance is his default mode. It is not simply that he is irritating. It is that he appears to believe irritation is charisma. Through all of this, the apology tour reveals its true purpose, not reconciliation, but power reclamation. The phrasing matters. Apologizing so they can move forward implies authority over their forward movement. It positions him as the gatekeeper of their healing, the spiritual supervisor signing off on their independence. It also forces the ex-wives to respond to his summons, to meet on his terms, to sit in his orbit while he narrates their past and their future. Even if production incentives encouraged these meetings, the patriarchal ego is incapable of interpreting participation as employment. It reads it as devotion. The presence of a new partner in one former wife's life provides an especially instructive contrast. When told directly that the women have already moved on, the patriarch appears rattled, less by the factual claim than by its implication. He is no longer the protagonist. He is also urged to focus on repairing relationships with his children, advice that lands as an insult precisely because it removes him from the romantic storyline he prefers. Yet he cannot resist taking credit even there, implying that the former wife's new happiness is, somehow, a product of his actions. The narcissist cannot tolerate being a cautionary tale. He insists on being a benefactor. The family's internal politics complicate the hero narrative that some viewers might want for the original wives. Independence from the patriarch is celebrated, but independence from each other is also suggested as a source of relief. The women's personalities clashed. They sometimes brought out the worst in one another. Toxic dynamics existed beyond the man. Some ongoing sniping may be genuine, and some may be performance for the cameras. The point is not to canonize anyone. It is to observe that a structure designed to create sisterhood often creates rivalry, surveillance, and scarcity thinking, especially when one spouse controls time, intimacy, and validation as currency. This context reframes one lingering question. Would the first wife have left without the second wife leaving first? The relationship was dead early, and abandonment was not subtle. Yet, staying became a long habit, reinforced by loyalty ideology and, more cynically, by the show's incentives. When another wife finally chose departure, it may have felt like betrayal not because leaving was wrong, but because leaving broke the agreement to maintain the facade. Look at the mountains speeches and "you don't get to quit" scolding, read like internalized captivity. Language used to keep someone else trapped because one has not yet found a door. The favored wife's manipulation deepens the tragedy. Loyalty to the patriarch became a condition for access to the favored wife's children. Children the first wife loved and hoped to share as family. Meanwhile, access was limited, controlled, and deployed for filming. Attempts to connect with other children risked being labeled disloyal or unsafe. The result was isolation. Distanced from the patriarch, distrusted by other wives, and strung along by the favored wife's promises. Add rumors of further deception, strategic uses of legal divorce, obstruction of educational opportunities, calculated exploitation of scandal, and the picture becomes less "she stayed because she is loyal" and more "she stayed because she was cornered." Finally, the discussion detours into the religious ecosystem that shaped these choices, and the detour is not incidental. Doctrinal practices such as proxy baptisms for the dead, post-mortem sealings, and gender asymmetric eternal marriage arrangements are not quaint trivia. They reveal how control extends beyond life into an afterlife bureaucracy. The notion that a deceased person can be ritually enrolled into a faith they declined in life, or that men can be sealed to multiple women while women are limited to one man, fits neatly with the patriarchal logic on display throughout the show. The shifting theology around exaltation, planets, and evolving modesty rules underscores a broader pattern. Institutional certainty that adjusts quietly while insisting it never changed. The resulting experience for many is a sense of violation, of autonomy overridden, boundaries treated as negotiable, and spiritual identity treated as communal property. Put all of this together, and the apology tour becomes almost useful, just not in the way it intended. It documents the collapse of a patriarchal fantasy under the weight of the women it failed to break. It exposes the favored wife dynamic as either a dependent worship ritual or a sophisticated con, possibly both. It spotlights a household economy that can justify luxury hoards while rationalizing medical neglect. It confirms what the show has long avoided naming directly. The system does not merely fail sometimes. It is designed to fail for most participants, especially women and children, once novelty and fertility shift elsewhere. And the patriarch, in the center of this slow-burning wreck, continues to do what he does best: perform. He performs remorse, leadership, masculinity, and spiritual authority. He performs motion for the camera, philosophy for the microphone, and victimhood for the storyline. The former wives, meanwhile, perform something far more radical, a life where his opinion is optional. That is the one performance he cannot outtalk, outspin, or outrun. Subscribe.